Okay, this is section 6.2 in MathLinks 8. We are learning how to divide fractions this time by whole numbers. In the first section, 6.1, you learn how to multiply a fraction by a whole number, and in 6.2, you're going to learn how to divide a fraction by a whole number. So your first question says 3/4 divided by 3. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to divide our shape into quarters. There's a quarter, there's a quarter, there's a quarter. And if I have 3/4, 3/4 divided between three people, 3/4 of a chocolate bar or whatever, divided between three people. And these three people we'll just give names. We'll give them Mr. Mac. We'll give it Adam. And we'll give it Debbie. So if I have to share this chocolate bar, which is 3/4 of a chocolate bar between three people, Mr. Mac, Adam, and Debbie, it's really easy. Because Mr. Mac is going to get this part, Adam is going to get this part, and Debbie, oh look at that, it's so mad, is going to get that part. So if I have 3/4 of a chocolate bar, therefore 3/4 of a chocolate bar divided between three people, each person would receive a quarter of a chocolate bar. And that makes sense when you think about it, because of course if you have three pieces of chocolate, everybody gets a piece. How big is the piece? It's a quarter of a chocolate bar. However, in the second question, if we had 5/6 of a chocolate bar, so this time I'm going to draw 5/6 of a chocolate bar. So I'm going to draw my chocolate bar, cut it in half, put 2 lines and 2 lines to make 6 parts. This time I'm going to get all fancy and sophisticated and use my highlighter because I like my highlighter better. And do 5/6 of a chocolate bar. If I have 5/6 of a chocolate bar and I have 5/6 divided between how many people? 2 people. This time it's going to be myself, Mr. Mac, and Elwood, if that's a real person's name. Mr. Mac and Elwood are going to share or divide it between the 2 people, Mr. Mac and Elwood. So the easiest way to do it is to simply take this chocolate bar and cut it right down the middle. Okay? And this will be Mr. Mac's part, and this will be Elwood's part. Okay? So Mr. Mac, or myself, is getting this, and Elwood is getting this. So the question is, how much does each person get? Well, there originally was 5/6 of a chocolate bar, but since this is mine, this is, each of these pieces here is now 1/12 of a chocolate bar, right? So how much chocolate am I getting? I'm getting 5/12 of a chocolate bar, and so is Elwood. So therefore, 5/6 of a chocolate bar divided between 2 people means that each person will receive just under half of a chocolate bar, or 5/12 of a chocolate bar. All right, just for fun and giggles, let's try one more. Let's say 3/4 of a chocolate bar divided between 5 people. Okay, let's just see what this one looks like. So for this one, you guys go ahead and try it. I'll press pause. You guys try it and see if you're right. So the first thing I'm going to do is obviously draw my 3/4. Bless you. And I'm going to use my highlighter because I love my highlighter. And this time, though, I'm going to make it a little bit, I'm going to make it a little light strawberry chocolate bar. Just because it's always nice to have different flavors when we're dealing with chocolate. So light strawberry chocolate bar divided between 5 people. So I'm like, well, this doesn't work. I can't give each person one of those quarters because that would be not enough. So I have to cut it into 5 parts. So I'm going to make 5 cuts, or 4 cuts, sorry. 1 cut, 2 cuts, 3 cuts, and 4 cuts. This part up here, which I'll circle just temporarily, is Alvin's, right? That's Alvin's. This is Billy's, Sandra's, Darius's, and Ellen's. Okay? So if we think about what it was, it used to be 3/4. That chocolate bar used to be 3/4, but what I essentially did was I chopped it up into an equivalent fraction. So it was 3/4 of a chocolate bar, but the equivalent fraction is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. I have 15/20ths shaded in pink. Do you agree? So all we have here is we just created an equivalent fraction by cutting. I haven't added or subtracted anything from the fraction. All I've simply done is created an equivalent fraction. And if I asked you to split 3/4 between 5 people, you couldn't do it. But if I said, can you split 15/20 between 5 people, you could. How much would each get? Each person would get, since each of these is a 20th, each person would get 3/20 of a chocolate bar. And therefore, 3/4 of a chocolate bar divided between 5 people is 3/20 of a chocolate bar each. Okay? So I'm going to write that down here. I'm just going to put it down here. So 3/4 divided by 5 is equal to 3/20. Now remember, we are dealing with fraction sense, but we could also change this to what type of division statement that doesn't involve fractions. I could also divide it, or I could also use decimals instead, correct? What would this look like if it was a decimal statement? It would be 0.75, which is what 3/4 is, divided by 5. And now I could use my calculator and say, what is 0.75 or 75 cents divided between 5 people? The answer would be 0.15. Oh, that's the world's worst 1.5 ever. And guess what? Well, guess what 3/20 is as a decimal? Anyone want to guess? Probably 0.15, right? So if I just check 3 divided by 20, it is 0.15. So if I think about it as a fraction, this is the statement I create. If I rethink that thing not using fractions but rather decimals, that's the statement I get. And there's one more way I could translate. Instead of thinking about 3/4 of a chocolate bar, I could think of what percent of a chocolate bar. What percent of a chocolate bar did I have to start? No, what did I start with? I started with 75% of a chocolate bar divided between 5 people. And I take my calculator and say, what is 75% divided between 5 people? Each person would receive 15% of a chocolate bar, right? If you had 75% of a chocolate bar and you had to divide it between 5 people, each person would receive 15% of a chocolate bar. Does that make sense? These two kind of make a little bit more sense because they are representations that we can kind of wrap our heads around. With fractions, it's a little bit more complicated to get your head around it, but it's still the same equivalent thing. It's still the same expression.